I've been playing a lot of Elden Ring recently, and that game is just amazing. The graphics, the atmosphere, the combat, the lore, everything is just amazing. But of course, the best part of the game is getting hugged by Fia. Oh yeah, the boss fights too. In Elden Ring, like in most games with bosses, boss fights are roadblocks games throw at you to make sure the game isn't too easy. They can serve a variety of different purposes. Some are there to act as a skill check, some are there to teach you about an aspect of the game, and some are simply there to beat your under-leveled ass up. No matter what their purpose is, they're all usually following a few principles that make the fight good. And obviously, when something's good, people are gonna spend more money on it. And since I like money, I decided to make a game with my own epic boss fights. But for that, we first need to understand what makes those boss fights so fun. So let's look at a bunch of games and split their boss fights into smaller parts to see what makes them good. After that, we can borrow their elements for our game. Before I start, I'm going to be talking about a lot of games in this video. They won't contain any story spoilers, but I will show off some fights, so if you want the full experience for any of these games, you might want to click off. Also, if you're wondering why Joker from Persona is talking to you, I didn't know who else to use for the voice, so just be happy it isn't the default TikTok one. The meaning is the lore reason for the fight. It can be basically anything, as long as it kinda makes sense in the context of the game. If you have a good reason to fight, the fight will immediately feel more important. If a guy calls you stupid, you're probably gonna get kinda mad. But if that same guy comes up to you and just starts beating the shit out of you, I'm assuming you're gonna get a little bit more emotional. Bosses are the same way. If there's an emotional connection between the player and the boss, the fight is gonna have a bigger impact. For an example, in Dark Souls, fighting Sif has a huge emotional impact because you're not really fighting an enemy. He's just a good boy trying to protect his master's grave. After you kill him, you don't feel proud. You don't feel satisfied. You feel like a monster. Because that's what you are. Anyways, look at this evil, crazy-ass dude. In Final Fantasy VII, Sephiroth is a straight-up menace to society. He's evil as fuck, and fighting him feels more personal because of everything he did. Because of their lore, those two fights have a completely different feel. Other games like Cuphead say, nah, fuck the story. Here's an evil fucking train you need to kill. Good luck fighting it. For every boss in Cuphead, all you know is these people. And, creatures are probably evil, and you were told to kill them. There isn't much else to talk about. Every game is going to handle it differently, and there aren't really any rules they need to follow. Value is what you get from defeating a boss as a player. The reward can be a lot of things. A weapon, an ability, a special item. Maybe you unlocked a new path. Maybe you saved someone. Whatever it is, if the reward you get doesn't match the difficulty of the fight, it can feel underwhelming. Beating Troop Master Grimm in Hollow Knight is extremely satisfying because of how good he feels to fight. But he also gives you a charm notch, which is an amazing reward, and beating him lets you progress the story. But there's another important thing he gets you: the achievement. Seeing the Steam achievement pop up after I beat a boss scratches my tiny monkey brain in a certain way. It feels like the game is acknowledging your skill, and makes me feel like I achieved something after spending God knows how many hours making pixels change color on my magic box. Just to show you I'm not meat-riding Hollow Knight, I also have a negative example from it. And yes, the AI is gonna keep pronouncing it wrong. If you haven't played Hollow Knight, well, first of all, what the hell are you doing? Go buy it right now. If you're too lazy to do that and you don't want to get spoiled, you might want to click off the video. With that said, it's time to talk about the true final boss. The Radiance. This is it. This is the fight you've been waiting the whole game for. You're face to face with a god. This is one of the hardest base game fights and one of the most satisfying ones to beat. But it's all worth it, because after you finally defeat it, you get nothing. Now that may seem kind of stupid at first since, you know, it's the final boss. But you still have the Pantheons. They're like additional challenges after you beat the game. The point is, the game isn't over yet. So getting something isn't that unreasonable. And it wouldn't even have to be something that good. Just getting a mid-charm would feel that much cooler in my humble and objectively correct opinion. There's a lot of things that have an effect on the atmosphere. The music, the area, the lighting, your surroundings. The game will feel more immersive the more fitting those things feel like. It can be chaotic and raise your heartbeat to 200, like Sans in Undertale. Or it can be slow and quiet, making you develop schizophrenia like the end in Metal Gear Solid 3. The perfect example of a good utilization of atmosphere is the final fight of Ghost of Tsushima. Obviously, spoiler warning. In the final duel, you're fighting your uncle on a flower field that's also the graveyard of Jin's family. It's calm and relaxing. It's your uncle's last attempt to make things right. Or at least, what he considers right. Then you beat his ass and spare him just to show him who's the GOAT. Of course, the boss itself also needs to match the vibe. When you combine these elements, you can set the tone for the fight before it even begins. The arena can be any place where you fight the boss. Some bosses can work in pretty much any place. If you have a boss like Radon that has long and close-range attacks and moves fast, you can do whatever you want. You could drop him in a Fortnite game, and he would probably do fine because of how adaptive he is. Now imagine fighting the Ender Dragon in I don't know, a house? The point is, it wouldn't work well because the Ender Dragon needs to be in the end for you to experience the full fight. The developers can also change the type of fight they want to create by changing the dimensions of the arena. In Elden Ring, fighting Margit for the first time and the second time is a lot different. Not only because he's doing more damage, but also because you now have much more space to work with. Before you only had about 10 meters of width, 33 feet for the Freedom People. And now you're in the open world. The game can also throw in some things you can't touch, like lava or poison, which gives you an additional thing to worry about. Things like that are usually paired with a more simple boss to not make things too difficult. The developers can also give you blocks or pillars to climb or hide behind. For an example, in Elden Ring when you're fighting Malekith, his arena is a circle with pillars on the edges. Unfortunately, they're useless since he can still cut through them, which kinda ruins the whole point of them being there, but hey, at least you get to see him do a sick backflip because of them. There's one thing not a lot of games have, and that's dynamic arenas. Dynamic arenas are the ones that change during the fight. They aren't used a lot, because if the arena around you was changing during the fight, that could distract you from the boss, or worse, make the fight annoying, because there's too many things to think about. But I'm not saying it can't be done. I think if done right, it could be an insanely unique fight. But if not, it would be absolute dog shit. And most companies aren't ready to take that high of a risk. The only type of a dynamic arena I remember seeing are fights with falling floor tiles. In fights like that, you need to constantly make sure you're not gonna fall on addition to fighting the boss. They're usually used in gimmick bosses, or when the boss has a simpler moveset. Now we're really getting into the good stuff. The most memorable boss fights are gonna be ones where the boss has the coolest attacks. A boss like that is Malenia. If you don't know who she is, don't worry. You're gonna hear her say it a lot.
I am Malenia, Lady of MacLeod. I am Malenia. I am Malenia, Lady of MacLeod.
The Malenia fight in Elden Ring was kinda controversial when the game came out. People thought she was too difficult and unfair. Little did they know 2 years later someone would show them the real meaning of difficulty, since she healed when she hit anything. You couldn't use shields or summons as effectively, which forced a lot of people into a different playstyle. And that's not good for a game like Elden Ring. Most of her moves were actually not that bad, but when she starts spinning like a Beyblade and starts sucking down your HP out of nowhere, it feels kinda unfair. That move is called the waterfowl dance, and it's really hard to dodge. Like actually not even close to anything else in the base game. But after 14 hours of grinding, you kinda get the hang of it. And once you start dodging the waterfowl, you feel like a god. So at the end of the day, she wasn't really that bad. Oh god, she has a second phase. See, in Elden Ring, most bosses with 2 phases will switch when their health reaches 50%. So when you beat Malenia, and she's like, psych, you didn't actually beat me. I'm naked and radioactive now. It kinda catches you off guard. If she wasn't hard before, she's definitely hard now. I'm also hard now. I don't think Malenia is a good boss, mostly because her moves are not balanced. Fighting most characters revolves around you looking at their movements to see what attack they're gonna do and find an opening. Fighting Malenia is entering the arena and praying to God she doesn't do the waterfowl, which kinda sucks because I like everything else about her fight. I think she would be much better if waterfowl had a smaller hitbox and she had a bigger health bar instead of healing after every hit. I get those things make her unique, but I don't think they work that well. A boss fight I really like is Nightmare King Grim. His attacks feel challenging, but fair. When you get hit, it's your fault and you know it. Because of that, beating him feels that much more satisfying. In Sekiro, every enemy feels like a mini-boss. It feels like a rhythm game and a Souls game mixed together. In Skylander's Trap Team, when you're fighting Chef Pepperjack, it feels more like you're playing his game rather than fighting him. At certain parts, you can't even deal any damage to him. I don't know why he doesn't position his lasers directly on me, but hey, as long as he's having fun, I guess. In Bowser's Fury, Bowser keeps disrespecting you by attacking you while you make your way through the level. You can only fight him after getting the big-ass bell that turns Mario into a furry. In Shadow of the Colossus, bosses are giants compared to you. Once you manage to climb on them, they keep trying to shake you off. All of these bosses have a few things in common. Their attacks are clear and fun to avoid. They make sense in terms of lore, and they feel like a test of skills you've acquired up until the point you're fighting them. If a boss has bad attacks and feels disappointing to fight against, you're not gonna like that part of the game. But if your character feels annoying or wanky to fight and control, you're not gonna like the game at all. That's how important players' movement and attacks are. The attacks you have need to pair well with the bosses you're gonna fight. Sometimes that's gonna be through a gimmick fight, where there's a special way of beating a boss rather than using your normal attacks. In other games, you can throw hands with a literal god. That's mostly used in games where you have your attacks. The boss has theirs and you have a fair fight to see who's stronger. In games like that, you can almost always customize your build. If that's the case, every type of build should at least be viable. Some builds are always going to be stronger than others, but when the way you chose to play the game isn't good enough to beat a certain boss, it feels like a huge fuck you from the devs. Anyways, let's look at some examples of games with a good dynamic between the boss and the player. Nightmare King Grim feels so satisfying to fight because your movements and attacks fit perfectly with his. Imagine you were a Street Fighter character and you had to combo his stupid ass. Hold up, that would be kinda cool actually. The point is, the boss and the player need to have a good dynamic to create a satisfying fight. In Ghost Runner, you get one shot by every attack, but that's okay because your movements allow you to dodge everything. Both you and the boss are glass cannons, and despite it being a gimmick fight, it still feels like a real duel. In Sekiro, you have to time your parries to break the enemy's stance and create an opening, which means you have to use the boss's attacks against him. In hack-and-slash games like Nier Automata, you're trying to deal damage as fast as you can while avoiding the boss's attacks at the same time. In Souls games, you need to perfectly time your dodges to avoid the boss's attacks and wait for an opening. In all of these games, players' attacks and bosses' attacks complement each other and create a good dynamic. If the boss's attacks are peanut butter, the players need to be jelly. Everything else about the fight can be great, but if that dynamic doesn't work, the fight is not going to be fun. If I hot glue your ass cheeks together, you're definitely gonna have a harder time taking a shit. But you're not gonna have more fun because of it. That's how most Souls copies feel like. They make the game hard for the sake of it being hard without understanding what makes good Souls-like games fun. Souls games are difficult, but still fair, and the rewarding feeling you get after beating a boss comes from overcoming that challenge and beating the odds. So, how difficult should those fights be? Well, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes even From Software goes too far and makes something that's way too hard for the average player. They also can't just make a boss that's not challenging at all. To choose how hard a fight needs to be, they need to look at the point in game where we're fighting the boss and the game's target audience. With that, they can find the skill level of the average player and make the fight with that in mind. I wish I could talk more, but I'm running out of words on 11 labs, so I'm gonna have to stop here. So, I guess that's it. Those were just my objectively correct opinions, so don't feel too bad if they're different than yours. It just means you're wrong. But for real, I hope the AI voice isn't too annoying. I did what I could to make it work. But yeah, that's all I have to say. Thanks for watching and, yeah, subscribe and like for more.